Hello.
Hello. After 8 months of making this project, I am finally ready to share it. I started this in mid-October, and I finally completed to show to you all. So I present to you the true influence of money in football, the documentary. Money is truly the driving force behind the game of football, with transfers sometimes happening for 9-figure sums, TV rights being the heartbeat of some leagues, and advertisements being everywhere. Footballers, like the generational Lionel Messi or Cristiano Ronaldo, make hundreds of millions from brand deals from companies like Nike, Adidas, Socios, and many others. Not to mention the 6-figure, sometimes even 7-figure sums they make from their clubs every week. Football clubs and governing bodies also get copious amounts just from fans every week, whether it's from kit sales, matching ticket revenue, or potentially more they get from paid perks for the fans. They also indirectly earn money from fans by broadcast and streaming companies for TV and broadcast rights to the league. The broadcast and streaming companies earn money from the fans who pay money to them to watch the league. The questions I will attempt to answer today in this investigative project is: how much influence does money have in the game of football? How did it get this way? And where does it go from now? Football is a sport that, while it has only been around for 150 years, the concept goes back thousands of years, even back to ancient China, in a game named Kushu that was popularized in the Han Dynasty. Going forward again, 1904 to be precise, when FIFA, the world governing body of football, was founded by the football associations, or FAs, of most big European nations. Oddly enough, the English FA wasn't in the meeting and didn't help in the formation of FIFA. They will be one of the main characters of this entire story going forward, though. The first 25 years of the association were relatively quiet until in 1930 they organized and held the first World Cup. It was a 13-team World Championship, an odd number of teams, literally, much fewer teams than the 32 we see now, and 48 we will see in 2026. The World Cup wasn't just founded for revenue, it was also to create an international football tournament that wasn't the Olympics and the likes of which we hadn't seen before. FIFA also wanted an international tournament they had control over. Now though, of course, the World Cup is mostly about money, with the increase of teams to 48, the failed proposal of a biennial World Cup, and the choice to host it in Qatar, which we will talk about again later. Other than that, the football world was pretty clean until the mid to late 1950s and UEFA. In 1954, UEFA was founded as the football governing body of Europe, one level below FIFA. UEFA was born into more royalty than FIFA was. 1 year after their founding, they founded the competition that would become the Champions League. This added 8 more games to the finalist season total. 5 years later, the first Euros competition was played, bringing together the best nations from Europe. However, foundings of the World Cup, Champions League, and Euros were not about money, even though the continuation of them and changes to them in present day are. These competitions were simply to see which team or nation was the best in either Europe or the world. The 1970s were when everything changed. We start this story with a man named Derek Dougan. He did basically everything anyone who wants to be involved in football wants to do. He played 43 games for Northern Ireland, over 700 games across a 24-season career, playing for 4 English First Division sides, and towards the end of his career, he also took on a player-manager role for his last team, Kettering Town, while also being the chairman of the side. He was also chairman of the Players Association, and after all that, was a pundit and a writer. Going back to his Kettering Town days, the team was struggling financially, so player-manager chairman Derek Dougan decided to pick up some extra funds for the team by agreeing a deal with Kettering Tires, a local company, for a 4-figure sum, which would be 5 figures now, to put a logo on their shirt. The FA, England's football governing body, not impressed and threatened a $1,000 fine if the logo wasn't removed. Despite his best combat efforts, Dugan had to concede and removed the logo. A few German clubs saw this and decided to get their own shirt sponsorships when Bundesliga team Eintracht Braunschweig got beer company Jägermeister to sponsor their shirts. Dugan was still fighting the shirt sponsorship ban, and prior to the 1977-78 season, shirt sponsorship was permitted by the FA. Ironically, Kettering Town couldn't find a sponsor. Since then, shirt sponsors have become commonplace in every major league, and figures have become huge, like FC Barcelona's agreement with Spotify this spring for over 90 million euros. There's also when teams take it too far with sponsorships, like this monstrosity kit by Mjällby AIF in 2009. Yikes. Doesn't stop at shirts either. Stadiums are full of sponsors, from the boards outside the field to more boards on either side of the goal, out of play, and whole stadiums have been named after sponsors. Arsenal has the Emirates Stadium, Bayern is the Allianz Arena, Man City is the Etihad, and up until last year, Newcastle United Stadium, named the Sports Direct Stadium, had this for the measly cost of only £2 million per year. Transfers are one of my personal favorite things in football, but even I have to admit that the amount of money changing hands these days is over the top. The current world record fee is football legend Neymar moving from FC Barcelona to Paris Saint-Germain for 222 million euros, the equivalent of 298 million Canadian dollars in 2017. Why are transfers so expensive, and how have the prices inflated over the years? Let's take a walk. The first switch of players between teams for money was all the way back in 1893, when 24-year-old Willie Groves moved from West Bromwich Albion to local rivals Aston Villa for 100 British pounds, the equivalent of about 12,000 today. Like the shirt sponsorships from earlier, this was the first time something like this had happened. The FA had something to say about it. They slapped Aston Villa with a £50 fee for an illegal approach of a player, even though it's common practice in the football world today. Transfers didn't start picking up for a long time, however, the first transfer for being over 100,000 euros being Omar Sivori to Juventus 65 years later in 1958. Transfer scene didn't pick up until 2 years later, when a 16-year-old Gianni Rivera transferred to AC Milan for 3 times the world record fee, 300,000 euros, around 3 million today, and went on to play over 650 games for the club. First superstar transfer happened a year later when the original Luis Suarez joined Inter Milan from FC Barcelona for 175k. First transfer that happened for 1 million euros was the legendary Johan Cruyff, who joined Barcelona from Ajax in 1973 for 1 million euros and became one of the best players in the history of the sport. However, only 6 years later, in the summer of 1979, 5 players would be transferred for over $1 million, including Andy Gray, transferred to Wolves for $3 million, 3 times the price of Cruyff only 6 years earlier. Only instead of being 3 times the player Cruyff was at Barcelona, he went on to play only 20 games for Wolves over a 3-year period and joining Everton for $500k. By the mid-80s, transfers were in full swing. In the 1984-85 season, legends such as Karl-Heinz Rummenigge, Paulo Futre, Graham Souness, Lothar Matthäus, and Diego Maradona moved teams. The 2 latter players are known as the 2 of the best 30 players ever to kick a ball. These were their career-defining moves. Lothar Matthäus moved to Bayern Munich for $1.2 million. He would go on to play 410 games and score over 100 goals as a midfielder over a 12-year period. And Diego Maradona, moving for a world record 12 million euros, the last of 3 times he broke the transfer record, considered to be in the top 3 of footballers all time, played 250 games for Napoli, scored 115, and assisted 67 over a span of 7 years. By 1990, 53 transfers happened for at least 1 million euros, the most expensive of which being Roberto Baggio for 12 million, equaling the transfer record. But this time, there was a new proposition: transfer windows. They limited the period in which teams could make transfers, as teams could previously make transfers any time of season, which could provide unfair advantages. An example, if you're playing a team in a cup final, just sign their best player. It was eventually agreed upon that transfers could now only take place during the months of July, August, and January. July and August because the season is over by then, and July 1st, of course, because it's Canada Day. Canadian. No, I'm kidding. It's when a season becomes the next season. The first day of a new season, that is. However, some leagues have different transfer windows under the approval of FIFA because some teams run on a calendar schedule instead of a regular season schedule. And there's also January because there usually isn't any cup finals going on then, and it gives teams time mid-season to make changes to their squad, fill in any weak points, and sell poor-performing players. Transfer windows were implemented by FIFA officially in the early 2000s. The first 20 and 25 million euro transfers was Sonny Anderson to Barcelona for 27 million euros in 1997. It didn't work out. 2 seasons, 68 games, 21 goals, and left for a fraction of the price. After that, records were broken literally every season. In 1998, Danielson joined Real Betis, the first 30 million euro player. In 1999, Christian Vieri became the first 50 million euro player and is transferred into Milan. And in 2000, the transfer record was broken twice. First by Hernan Crespo in a 60 million euro move to Lazio, then by Luis Figo in a 65 million euro move to Real Madrid from Barcelona. Finally, in 2001, Real Madrid obliterated the transfer record in an 85 million euro move for a record which would stand until 2009. This period of time was accredited for increasing transfer inflation by the biggest amount before 2016. In 5 years, it went from there being no 20 million euro transfers in history to there being 16 in one window. However, after that, the inflation of transfers stopped for a few years. In 2008-09, there was 14 20-plus million deals. However, that all changed come 2009.
Hoy recibimos a Cristiano Ronaldo.
world transfer record was once again obliterated this summer, with Cristiano Ronaldo moving from Manchester United to Real Madrid for 94 million euros. But Los Blancos said they weren't finished. They signed 4 of the era's best players, the aforementioned Ronaldo, but also Kaká, Karim Benzema, and Xabi Alonso, a group with 175 accolades between them. Real would spend 258 million euros that window, by far the highest spending ever at the time, and still the 4th highest ever spent in one window, which you will come to see is an amazing feat to survive that long. After that window, transfers slowly started to inflate again, helped along by Manchester City, which had a cash inflation a year earlier, signing 6 players for over 20 million euros. Edin Dzeko, Yaya Toure, Mauro Balotelli, David Silva, Alexander Kolarov, and James Milner. A couple years later, a Qatari group followed Man City's lead and bought French club Paris Saint-Germain, known as PSG. PSG would go on to sign the most expensive player in 2011-12, Javier Pastore, for 42 million, and in 2012-13, they signed Thiago Silva for 42 million as well. They tied for the second most expensive player as well in that same window, Lucas Moura, for 40 million. However, 2012-13 was the end of the calm period for transfer fees. In the summer of 2013, we would see something we'd never seen before. After a 14 million euro move, Tottenham Hotspur changed the position of Gareth Bale from a left back to a right winger, playing 200 games in 6 years, scored 70 goals. This, according to Real Madrid, warranted them breaking the transfer record again, the 3rd or 4th time they had broken their own record at this point. This one was a little more special than the previous ones. The first 9-figure transfer fee in history. They spent a grand total of 101 million euros on Gareth Bale's transfer fee. And this wasn't the only huge transfer that window, as Neymar Jr. became the 3rd most expensive transfer ever, joining Barcelona from Santos for 88 million euros. Fun fact, at the time of writing, some of the people involved in this deal, including Neymar himself, could be facing jail time, and the deal is currently undergoing a court case. Now, this window was the one that really started to give transfer inflation the kick it needed, as in the next window there was 3 transfers for 75 plus million euros. The first was Luis Suarez to FC Barcelona for 81 million, then it was James Rodriguez to Real Madrid for 75 million, and finally Angel Di Maria to Man United for the same price. 31 players moved for 20 plus million. Transfer inflation was in full swing, and the train wasn't stopping. The legacy of the next window was defined by the Chinese Super League, which provided us with 5 years of comedic transfer madness that could be its own project. Jiangsu Suning, a now defunct team, paid 50 million for Alex Teixeira, the player who had never played in a division greater than the 8th best in Europe, according to UEFA, and was already 26. Guangzhou Evergrande also paid 42 million for Jackson Martinez after he, a striker, scored 2 goals in 24 games in half a season for Atletico Madrid. Finally, Shanghai SIPG paid 18 million for Alcacer when his transfer value at the time was only 4.5 million. Chinese clubs would continue spending like this, sometimes spending dozens of players' transfer fees, only for them to play 10 games and leave after 2 seasons. Toward the end of 2020 and 2021, the spending caught up with them, and many clubs were forced to either significantly cut down spending, get transfer bans, or even fold altogether in one of the most chaotic stretches in the history of Chinese football. In 2016, the transfer record broke again, this time not by Real Madrid. It was by the other one of the 2 most legendary clubs ever, Manchester United. They paid a whopping 105 million euros to bring back a player who used to play in their academy, Paul Pogba, from Juventus. Cancelo Higuain also commanded 90 million euros when he moved to Juventus, and Shanghai SIPG was back at it again and paid more than double the market values of Oscar and Hulk, combined 110 million in January. There were now 6 players who commanded 50 million, the last 2 being John Stones and Leroy Sané, who both moved to Manchester City. This was the window that gave transfer inflation the last little move forward. Now, if you thought the spending in 2016-17 was copious, you've not met the summer of 2017. The first transfer window I personally witnessed, that was my time as a football fan, and spending-wise, the window I consider the best. To show the inflation in transfers over the last 8 years, 79 transfers were completed for 20 million euros or more. Man City went on a madness, signing Aymeric Laporte, Benjamin Mendy, Kyle Walker, Bernardo Silva, and Ederson for over 250 million combined. There were also 3 transfers for 9-figure sums. Ousmane Dembele to Barcelona for 125 million, Philippe Coutinho to Barcelona for 140 million, and the current world record transfer and the reason for the previous 2 transfers, Neymar Jr. to PSG for 222 million. We also saw Romelu Lukaku join Man United for 84 million, Virgil van Dijk joined Liverpool for the same fee, and Alvaro Morata joined Chelsea for 66 million, as they had money to burn from the Oscar sale. It was a head-scratching window for football purists, if not a little confusing and infuriating. However, the transfer train was going full speed and it wasn't stopping. An analogy I just used before. The 2018-19 transfers were a little less extravagant in terms of spending anyway. Some of the world's biggest names made career-defining moves in 2018-19. Riyad Mahrez moved to Man City for 67 million, Alisson joined Liverpool for 62 million, Vinicius Jr. joined Real Madrid, and Fabinho joined Liverpool, both for 45 million. Thibaut Courtois switched the colours of Chelsea for those of Real Madrid for a bargain 35 million, and Lautaro Martinez joined Inter Milan for 25 million. Those transfers alone would have made the window great, but 2 transfers made it unforgettable. A 33-year-old Cristiano Ronaldo ended his 9-year chapter at Real Madrid in a 117 million euro switch to Italian giants Juventus, and Kylian Mbappe moved permanently to PSG for 180 million, the second most expensive transfer ever, after going there on loan a year earlier. It kicked off a still ongoing will he won't he transfer saga. The 2019-20 transfer window may have had the most spending. A whopping 108 deals were completed for at least 20 million. 8 were made for at least 80 million. Nicolas Pepe to Arsenal and Lucas Hernandez to Bayern for exactly that amount. Matthijs de Ligt to Juventus for 85 million. Frenkie de Jong to Barca for 86 million. The walking meme himself, Harry Maguire, to
Harry Maguire!
Man United for 87 million. Eden Hazard to Real Madrid for 115 million. Antoine Griezmann to Barcelona for 120 million, and João Felix to Atletico Madrid for 127 million. None of these were undisputed successes, and this is known as the window of failed transfers. The spending was limited in the 2020-21 season due to the COVID pandemic, which forced fans to go out of stadiums and which made clubs lose matchday revenue, a crucial part of their revenue. So it pushed them to be more careful with spending. The most expensive deal was 80 million spent by Chelsea on Kai Havertz. And there were only 62 transfers for 20 million euros. I say only in air quotes. And also, because of the competition delays from the pandemic, the transfer window went from July 27th to October 5th. The only big transfers here were either massive overpays or massive underpays. And the most expensive was 80 million spent by Chelsea on Kai Havertz. 2021 summer, with football back to normal, clubs were eager to spend the first big money they've spent in 2 years. The big story of the window was somehow free transfers. Euro 2020, played in 2021, player of the tournament, Gianluigi Donnarumma, the legendary centre-back Sergio Ramos, Liverpool stalwart Gini Wijnaldum all signed for PSG on a free, David Alaba joined Real Madrid for free, Barcelona had to make all their signings for free due to financial difficulties, which included Memphis Depay, Eric Garcia, and Sergio Aguero, but by far, the biggest free transfer was Lionel Messi joining PSG after Barcelona forbade Barcelona to re-sign their most legendary player, again due to financial trouble. And if you see their transfer history in the past, you'll probably know where I'm coming from with that. Despite all the free transfers, there was still plenty of big money deals. Romelu Lukaku joined Chelsea for 113 million. Jack Grealish joined Man City for 117 million. Jadon Sancho joined Man United for 85 million. And Dusan Vlahovic joined Juventus for 81 million in January. Finally, we come to present day, 2022-23. This past summer didn't have any 100 million euro transfers, but it did have a 95 million transfer in Antony to Manchester United. Wesley Fofana joined Chelsea, Aurelien Tchouameni swapped Monaco for Real Madrid, and Darwin Núñez signed for Liverpool for 80 million euros each. It's also one of the biggest bargains ever in Erling Haaland from Man City for 60 million. He has 25 goals at the time of writing. Robert Lewandowski at 34 joined Barca for 45 million and has 16 goals already this season. Having learned so much in a whopping 20 minutes about the full history of transfers, it is still a little confusing as to why they have inflated so much over the last 6 to 7 years, as just in the general and real world, inflation hasn't taken that much of a rise. However, there are a few people and deals who we could point to. Florentino Perez is one of them. He's broken the transfer record 4 times as president of Real Madrid, and his dealings held the transfer record for 16 years, until Man United signed Paul Pogba. He negotiated the deals of Luis Figo for 60 million, for 85 million, Cristiano Ronaldo for 94 million, and Gareth Bale for 101 million. We can also point to the Paul Pogba deal we just mentioned, which broke the transfer record. It was 105 million, and transfers went mad after that. But likely the biggest culprit in transfer inflation is Nasser Al-Khelaifi. After buying PSG in the early 2010s, he made the most expensive signing 2 consecutive windows. He made the 2 most expensive signings in 2011 and 2012, and in 2017 bought Neymar for 222 million, and Mbappe on loan with a 180 million obligation to buy. The Neymar transfer in particular made Barcelona make multiple 9-figure deals in a bid to replace one of their star players in Neymar, which also boosted the inflation of the market. Its other teams wanted to show their financial strength and really just compete with those 2 big teams. Kylian Mbappe also wants to leave PSG at the time of writing, and the French club wants upwards of 300 million euros for him. Of course, nothing in this game is certain, and we could even see Mbappe terminate his contract and join a new team for free. If Mbappe moves teams for the 300 million price tag, might we see even more inflation. 50 years ago, we were seeing the first 1 million euro transfers, and legends of the game were moving for that amount. What will we be seeing 50 years from now? Will 250 million become the new 100 million? Will 100 million become the new 20 million? Will we even see transfers in the 2070s? Nothing is certain, as I said, but I'll be quite intrigued to find out. This is one of the biggest reasons I even made this. Qatar is one of the most frowned upon countries in the world of football. Not because of the culture of people, of course, but because of the people with power there. The richest people who have been infiltrating the game with money for the last 15 years, culminating in a World Cup this year. It's currently a month until the World Cup as I type this, and a month since the World Cup as I say this. But the tournament may have already kicked off by the time this is out. I can't really say, probably. However, while xenophobia exists in football in many respects, it's certainly not the sole reason for football fans' dislike of Qatar. As we will find out in this segment and beyond, money makes the football world go round, and many of the Qataris in high positions have much more of it and thus more, in air quotes, influence within the ranks of FIFA. A recurring character we'll see in this project is Sepp Blatter, the Swiss man who gained infamy in the football community, a former president of FIFA who, again, in air quotes, liked money, we'll say. While nothing's official, when Qatar was awarded the 2022 World Cup back in 2014 during Blatter's tenure, many football fans have a hunch that money had something to do with it, with the lack of stadium development and lack of footballing history in Qatar. We got even more evidence for this that in 2015, 5 years after the World Cup was awarded to Qatar, Sepp Blatter and many others were convicted of corruption, many different charges, and incurred a 12-year ban serving in FIFA activities, which he is still going to be serving until 2027. It is also thought that one of the big reasons that the Qatari sports group, fronted by Nasser Al-Khelaifi, bought PSG is to get the World Cup to Qatar, and after the tournaments, maybe they won't back Les Parisiens as much. With the World Cup under wraps, just to host the sheer amount of football fans over the World Cup in just 8 years, Qatar needed to improve infrastructure drastically and build 7 stadiums from scratch. That would be a difficult task, and if you're expecting some sort of miracle, there isn't. Even when there was a month to go until the World Cup, Qatar seemed nowhere near ready to host such an event. All 7 stadiums were built, but one had to be made out of shipping crates, which was dismantled after the round of 16 stage, and many of the stadiums had to be dismantled because Qatar just simply couldn't afford to maintain so many big stadiums. And they were also built under harsh conditions. A number that ranges from 30,000 to 2 million immigrant and refugee workers were forced to essentially live on the job, work far longer than 8-hour shifts, and were promised minimum wage and were paid even less. They also had their passports confiscated so they couldn't go to another country, and if they protested, they were fired and deported, still without a passport. Despite the Qatari government saying that in the construction of the stadiums there were only 3 work-related deaths, The Guardian reported in 2021 that the number was closer to 6,500. It was also reported that another 37,000 suffered minor to moderate injuries on the job. This situation has rightly gained much attention, with the BBC, The Guardian, Reuters, and more reporting stories on it. And human rights organization Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch have called out Qatar on it and has called for change. At one point, even a boycott was on the cards. Sum everything up, the World Cup was given to a country unfit to host it, shadily by a corrupt president, and had to build 7 huge stadiums from scratch, which it couldn't do even that well, abuse its workers, can't make it happen in the summer. Do you think money might not have something to do with this? A big side effect of the World Cup being in Qatar is that it had to be in winter. There's been a flurry of games in the build-up to the World Cup that was hard to catch up with. 13 to 14 games have been played in each league since August, 4 UEFA competition group stage games were played, and the first 1 to 2 games of some domestic cup competitions in 3 months. at the time of writing. That adds up to over 20 games played in 3 months, which is equivalent to nearly a game every 3 days for 3 months. That's near to an MLB type schedule. What's wrong with that, you may ask? Well, it's bad for a few reasons. The most talked about one being the toll it takes on players. In regular season, injuries are still a staple. For example, Barcelona in late 2021 had Ousmane Dembele, Memphis Depay, Ansu Fati, Martin Braithwaite, Pedri, Clement Lenglet, Sergio Roberto, and Eric Garcia all out through injury at the same time in a normal season. On the schedule this season, injury crises have become almost the standard, with it looking like a last man standing competition rather than an actual football match. Juventus are one of the hardest hit teams from the cramped schedule, having played 20 games. At one point near the end of October, they had 15 injuries, including ones to their most key players, such as Paul Pogba, Angel Di Maria, Dusan Vlahovic, and Federico Chiesa. Despite one of this being one of the favorites, they're fourth in Serie A at the time of writing, 10 points off the pace, and finished third in their Champions League group, having go down to the Europa League. Imagine that. Chelsea have also been hit hard by injuries, but also their own decisions. After a poor start in the Premier League and Champions League, they sacked manager Thomas Tuchel after backing him with €300 million just the previous month. The replacement, Graham Potter, has been far from inspiring in the 2 months he's been on the job. Back to injuries, their best midfielder and left back are both out, as well as many other key players, such as Raheem Sterling and Cesar Azpilicueta, with more minor injuries to the rest of their team. All this combined has seen them be 8th currently in the Premier League, 17 points from the top, and 8 points behind 4th place. That was at the time of writing. At the time of talking, they are now 10th. And they are closer to bottom of the league than they are to the top of the league. In general, injuries have been rampant this season, with many big players having got major injuries, therefore having missed the World Cup due to the bloated schedule. Thankfully, after the Cup, the schedule will go back to relative normality and normal cramming. However, more competitions have been proposed to keep more games going, and perhaps by 2030, we'll see this level of cramming become the norm, even in a season where the World Cup isn't in the winter. Let's pray not, for the players' sake. TV rights are one of the most important aspects of football for clubs and fans alike. TV rights decide from which broadcaster fans will watch a said league, and the money exchanged in TV rights deals are one of the most important revenue streams to the leagues and the clubs. TV rights work like this. A specific TV network or streaming service wants to show a league in their country or region, so they pay a large amount of money to the league to be able to broadcast games to fans. They also can do recap shows and special photo shoots with players in the league, among other things. The league's governing body then gets that money, keeps a percentage of it for the league, and splits the rest of the money along the clubs. In the summer of 1992, after nearly 100 years of the first 4 divisions being run by an association called the Football League, the 22 First Division clubs unanimously resigned from the Football League with backing from the FA and founded their own league, the Premier League. One of the main selling points for the new league was a massive TV deal with Sky Sports for £305 million, worth $771 million today, which more than sextupled the deal they got to the First Division, which is $47 million, worth $118 million today. All this money may have seemed good, but it had 2 major drawbacks. First, it rather spoiled the competitiveness of football, as when teams got promoted to the Premier League, they may have finished from 10th, 13th, but now, because of the financial gap, they are in a relegation battle. with it being the standard that at least one of the 3 promoted teams always went down each season. Switching divisions that often is never good for club finances either. Also, the extra influx of money gave the new Premier League teams an excuse to spend money it didn't have. And only 6 of the founding 22 teams have not been relegated since then, and 8 have gone down to the 3rd division, oddly called League One now, at least once, if not the 4th division at some point after the league's founding. Despite all these downfalls, in order to continue competing with the now ultra-rich English clubs, other clubs had to attract big TV rights deals as well. Leagues like La Liga, Serie A, and the Bundesliga got huge TV rights deals. They are now a big part of the revenue streams of both football leagues and clubs, with the football world not being able to function correctly without it anymore. Also, to further the team skill gap, big clubs can negotiate with other broadcasters to get even more money from TV rights, which simply isn't an option for other clubs due to their lack of image. Suppose you're a mid-size English radio station.
This is great banter.
Would you want a team like Manchester United or a team like Yeovil Town on your show? Pretty easy there. However, it isn't just a skill gap in teams that is happening because of TV rights, but league skill gaps. The huge TV rights deals the Premier League has with companies like Sky Sports and Fubo, as opposed to other TV deals from other leagues, has pushed the division to have more funding and sign better players and just have, in general, better clubs than the other leagues. That may seem good, and it is for the Premier League, but it isn't for literally every other league. With the Premier League snapping up so many stars, the skill gap in leagues will only increase. If you thought that's bad, though, it's the definition of parity compared to a drama in 2021. After 20 years of preparation, 12 big European clubs, including 6 Premier League teams,
you've got some really big British clubs, and Tottenham as well,
resigned from UEFA and founded their own competition, called the Super League. It looked for a while like they would leave their leagues to play in this league, but they wouldn't. It would be a placement for the Champions League. And after 3 days of pressure by fans, it fell apart, and 9 of the 12 clubs resigned from the project, and the football world returned to normal. A big factor in creating the Super League was TV rights, which were supposed to go to Disney Plus. It was to go to Disney Plus for hundreds of millions of euros. It also signed a big deal with JP Morgan for nearly 5 billion euros to be split amongst the 12 teams. There would be pretty much no parity in football if the league happened outside of the Big 12 teams, all kicked off by the Sky Sports deal in 1992. But again, it just goes to show how much money can influence the game. That will conclude my Influence of Money in Football documentary. As we can see, money has a huge influence on the modern game, from sponsors all around the stadiums, to transfers for ridiculous fees, massive wage fees, sugar daddies, FIFA corruption, overcramming, the Super League, and more. Money's role in football has increased drastically recently, as we explained. However, all we've explained is the surface level money, and who knows just how many under-the-table deals happen that the public doesn't know about. About all that. For now, though, this is all we have. Thank you for sticking all the way through this monster of a documentary. Thanks for listening.